Welcome again to a conversation. I'm talking to Dave Collins. He's a professor of human performance science at Edinburgh and Elite Performance at Dublin City University. He's the director of Grey Matters Performance. As an academic, Dave has over 450 peer-reviewed publications and 19 book chapters. As a practitioner, he has worked with over 19 world or Olympic medalists, plus professional teams and performance. Dave has coached to national level in 3 sports, is a 5th Dan Karate, Fellow of the Society of Martial Arts, basis ND Dave ZSL. What is that?
That's the Zoological Society of London.
Thank you. And an
Yes.
Associate Fellow of the BPS and ex-Royal Marine. So thank you, Dave, for talking again. Today we're talking about the ecological dynamic approach. And you wrote a great paper, and I can show it here. I'm not sure if you can see it. This is the paper, isn't it?
That is the one.
Yeah. So you wrote a paper called The Ecological Dynamics as an accurate, and this is very difficult for me as a non-English, par
Parsimonious.
contributor to athlete practice, a clinical appraisal. And I would love to talk with you about that because ecological dynamics is very popular today. But before that, Dave, also for me personally, sometimes people think I'm against the ecological dynamics approach, and I want to make clear that for more than 15 years we are teaching ecological dynamics at the University of Applied Sciences, Physical Education here in the Netherlands. With Frank Bos, we initiated a lot of it, and other people. But we also did a lot of other things like teaching games for understanding and all kinds of motor learning. It's just a broad toolbox. So it's it's not something new. It's something we did, something we do. But there are also maybe some concerns, and this is your paper about this is yeah your paper
And I,
about it. Yeah.
and I think, Eric, if I may,
Yeah.
I'd reiterate that position. There are some things about ecological dynamics which I think are absolutely almost irrefutable. Direct perception is far and away the best, the most parsimonious explanation that you'll get for stuff. It's just that what seems to have happened is I've called this construct creep, whereby one idea seems to expand and expand and expand and try to take over everything. If we step outside motor control for a while, 15 years ago, mental toughness was the construct, and everything was related to mental toughness. Although it did seem very frequently defined in lots of different ways. Now, the words that the construct of taste are either psychological safety or resilience, and
Yeah.
they seem to dominate the literature, and everything is viewed through these lenses. And again, I'm afraid, maybe because I'm a cantankerous old fella, I don't see one factor, one construct, one approach as at the moment being able to explain everything. So my colleagues and I, including a Swede and an American up there, two
Mhm.
Brits, came back and sort of said, look, here are some inconsistencies, here are some concerns that people might like to consider.
Yeah, yeah, great. What is the best way to talk about it, Dave? Because you have the paper, and if we scroll down the paper, you see some concerns. The first concern, second concern, and I believe there are 5 concerns. Is that a good way to talk about it, or do you have?
Yes, of course. I think, I mean, just so we get them straight up front, and you might like to scroll through as we do them, Eric.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first blocks are inconsistencies between and within. So if you scroll down, you'll find there's a section that talks about inconsistencies between authors. So this is saying, all right, so from a consistency point of view, from a way constructs are used. And the way constructs are used is important because that gives you something to test. It gives you something to measure against.
Yeah.
And the table just below that shows the number of inconsistencies between authors. And then as you go down further, you even get inconsistencies within authors. So the same guy is saying things that are different in this paper to that paper.
Yeah.
Now, I should emphasize that's not particularly, that's not the sole preserve of ecological dynamics. You will find that a lot with scientists. Yeah. All I'm saying is that when you get that, it's very, very difficult to have something to test against, because it's almost like it's moving goalposts. Yeah. And maybe England would be better at soccer, although I doubt it, if we were allowed to move the goalposts all the time. But when they do, it makes for a not very good game. So that was this lack of conceptual clarity was our first challenge. If you scroll down, you'll go past the two tables, and the two tables document a few exampple, and only a few. But you go through those, and then you'll get to the apparent disregard for everything else that's out there, because there's an awful lot that talks about differential learning. It talks about the importance of understanding, the importance of cognition and metacognition, the usefulness of imagery and internal representations. And for some authors, and this is the point again, Eric, for some authors, those seem to be dismissed as they don't exist, which is a concern. So there's people ignoring what's going on. Scroll down a bit more, and you'll find that we then get into there we are, go through that lot. Okay, so now we're getting is what's being offered really new? And for example, the difference between constraints-led approach, which again I highlight is not an ecological dynamics specific theory, but it is an approach that seems to be very closely allied with it. But is constraints?
Can you explain that, Dave, for those?
Well, I think, look, I think, Eric, it's absolutely fine to ask me my opinion of ecological dynamics. I mean, I think that you might get someone whose work is very, very heavily locked in that to comment on it as well. But from my perspective, the idea of a constraints-led approach, whereby you constrain in some way the movement of the individual or the movement of the team, for example, in a tactical sense, and then see what that does and tease that through. Now, that's been around for an awful long time. From a team point of view, I think we quote in here, there are books in 1946 talking about conditioned games or putting a condition in a game to limit people's movement in certain directions to make it more likely that they'll move in others. Now, as far as I can see, that's pretty much a constraints-led approach. I personally have used what might be what some would call a constraints-led approach in coaching weightlifting, in martial arts, in rugby. I use it across the board. The only difference that I can see is that I might then question the athlete, the performer afterwards, and say, so what changed? What did you do? So, for example, if I get someone to squat, I might get them to squat against a wall, facing the wall. And what that tends to do is keep them upright, makes their back very hollow. And I go, fine, now, what did you do? Oh, well, the wall made me do this. I say, okay, well, why is that good? And let's talk about it. Oh, okay, fine. That's a useful thing to think about. So now when you squat, imagine a wall there in front of you, and you're likely to get a better style. And I'd much rather do that than give a long list of, you must have your back hollow, you must be looking up, you must be doing this, you must be doing that. It makes sense. Yeah. But it's not exclusively ecological dynamics.
No.
You'll see this a lot. There's a technique called neurolinguistic programming. Yeah. Which some people actually it's quite akin. Some people love it. I think most people with half a brain hate it. And they hate it because all the literature, all the studies that have ever been done on it show that it's total twaddle. But there are lots of techniques which are referred to as NLP techniques, and they're not. They're just techniques. They're pan theoretical techniques. Yeah. I would use them. Someone else would use them. An NLP practitioner would certainly use them, but they're not exclusively the domain or the preserve of NLP. And that's our point here. Yeah. So these new concerns, are they really new? No, we think they've been around for quite a while.
And
If not,
why is this point important for you? That new insights are maybe not that new.
okay. The title of our paper talks about parsimony,
Hmm.
parsimonious, the best explanation.
Yeah.
And that for me is what science is about, surely. Science is about coming up with the best explanation that fits the data, fits what you see. All right.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, we used to believe the Earth was flat.
Hmm.
And then, lots of people came up with data, including sailing to America, and said, no, it's not. We used to believe that everything went round the Earth, and people came up with other data. Actually, the Earth-centric scientists came up with all sorts of very elaborate, complex terms and diagrams to show why they were right.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, the most simple explanation, the most parsimonious explanation, was that we went round the sun. And all of a sudden it went, yeah, all right, fair enough. That's like that. So it's important for me that when you read a paper, it doesn't say an alternative explanation. In ecological dynamics, we'd explain this like this. I'd rather they went, okay, I hear that, but what makes your explanation better than the existing explanation? Because
Hmm.
that's what we're after. We're after ways of explaining, mechanisms that work, consequences, things for us as applied practitioners that mean that we should do this because it's a better way of working.
Yeah.
And that's why are the insights really, really new or not is
Yeah.
important. Make
And,
sense?
yeah, makes sense. And what is the conclusion of this? That they are not that new as they maybe
I
are
think that
presented.
I think they're not as new as some some would claim,
Yeah.
because you've got a lot of people. Look, people are people, and you've got some very reasonable, high quality, studious scientists working in ecological dynamics. No doubt,
Yeah.
absolutely no doubt at all. A couple of my friends, that's fine. Yeah. But you've got lots of people who are so evangelical as to push the idea, and as you've experienced yourself, Eric, to be quite vociferous,
Hmm.
quite argumentative in their counter.
Yeah.
Now, I don't understand that. I don't understand the need for that. It's not like I'm insulting them. It's not like I'm even insulting, the guys who started EKD. I'm just questioning it. I'm asking questions.
Yeah.
Um, which when I was at primary school used to get me into all sorts of trouble. But since then, has stood me in good stead as a scientist.
Yeah. And on the left page, there is also you also talk about metacognition. If
Yes,
yes,
yes.
because I'm not sure. That maybe you can help me or your ideas because that's what I'm struggling with my reading of ecological approach. There seems to be, but I'm not sure. So I'm not the expert, but there is not a lot of attention to cognition and metacognition and so on. But maybe I'm wrong. So but this is my
Look,
reading.
no, no, no. I don't think you're wrong. I think your confusion matches my confusion
Hmm.
because you can read different things, and that's the point of the first section and
Yeah.
the second section of the
Yeah.
paper
Yeah.
about inconsistencies. Because some people say this doesn't exist. Some people says, well, it might exist, but then they go, okay, so does imagery work? Ah, yes, it's an internal constraint. So they reframe it,
Yeah.
rephrase it so it fits. And that I always get a bit twitchy about that as well, because it doesn't say the mechanism.
Hmm.
So again, my comment about ecological dynamicists is sometimes that they're concerned about the C word, in this case that's cognition,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
MC word, that they want to try and frame explanations that do not rely on this thing here.
Yeah.
And I completely agree that everything in the human body does not depend on this thing here. I completely agree. But it's whether at certain stages and ages, this thing is the most important thing to cater for. And then as people progress, you can use other techniques to to improve the quality of performance.
Yeah. And
So,
if we zoom out a little bit, Dave, maybe
yeah,
this is not the topic of this paper, but in my experience, learning something is also has something to do with remembering, with retrieval, with I'm not sure if these terms are still sound, like short-term memory, long-term memory, but it's like all those
I think
concepts,
the
retrieval
approach,
practice,
the
yeah.
approach is right. Well, look, for some people they will be old hat. For some people they will passe.
Hmm.
But they're constructs that have stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And and the most important thing to me is that there are two. The first is that they're parsimonious. The first is that they offer an explanation for what we see. So, for example, limitations to working short-term memory explain some of the data and some of the practical situations we see. And the second thing is that they offer a mechanism, and people will go in, and neuroscience has come along a long way. I mean, the EEG was the subject of my PhD because I wanted to understand the mechanisms as to how things went.
Yeah.
Actually, in martial arts, in breaking wood and performing kata as the first study. But the point here was that you have right. So that bit there is doing this, is it? Okay, fine. That's how that's working. So I'm always keen for parsimonious and mechanistic explanations,
Yeah.
things that explain what we see and do a good job of it,
Yeah.
and things that we can point and go, now that's done like that. So I'm automatically a bit twitchy about lots of new constructs, lots of new words, affordances, constraints, attunement, and I'm going, okay, are they useful?
Mm-hmm.
Not only are they accurate or inaccurate, are they useful? Do they offer greater parsimony? And I don't think they do. I don't think the case. There's the Scottish have a great thing in if you go to court in an English court of law, you're found guilty or not guilty.
Mm-hmm.
In Scotland, you can be found not proven. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't, and my Scottish friends will get cross. I don't think it's a way of being dodgy, but I think it's, well, we're really not sure.
Yeah.
And I'm really not sure. And one reason, and this paper says we're really not sure, is
Yeah.
because of a number of inconsistencies and things that seem strange. And it would be good to see the researchers and the practitioners in this area cashing in on this,
Yeah.
following through on this. That'd be
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the third concern about
Yeah.
the
So
yeah.
carry on down.
Yeah.
Carry on down. Yeah. And then
The,
we come to,
the
you
fourth
know,
concern. Yeah.
yes. So actually, when you start looking for evidence that this works, for example, I have a student who's just completed a study trying to compare traditional, if you like. That's the term that's used by this literature. It's somewhat pejorative, but never mind. So these are traditional methods, like demonstration and explanation, against these suggestions that follow from the ecological approach, something like a constraint set approach. And she's tried to compare, God bless her, and it's really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
These different methods working with young 11-year-olds and young 6-year-olds and 11-year-olds. Heck of a challenge. And
Yeah.
she's done a really tidy job. But the number of studies that directly compare or that directly compare directly examine the mechanisms as what goes on. So I've used neuroscience to look, and I can tell you that this area in the brain or this area in the body is doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're few and far between. They're growing, but they're certainly not growing at a rate that keeps pace with the spread of the ideas. So again, the ideas seem to be progressing, being accepted faster than the underpinning evidence, which is always another worry.
Did you also look at, are there any studies comparing constraint-led approach to, other methods?
They're very few. They're very few. And what is more, sometimes they're in circumstances which give an advantage to one or the other. If I can jump back a number of years. So I was doing research with a student at Penn State on Alicia Goginski, lovely lady, and we were doing research on explanations for how imagery worked.
Mm-hmm.
And she did a marvelous study that showed that the two competing ideas at the time were the psychoneuromuscular and the symbolic cognitive, and we won't go into them. But basically, what she said was, if you like this one, you choose these sorts of tests, and lo and behold, you get the results you want. If you like this one, you choose these sorts of tests and tasks, and lo and behold, you get what you want. Not only that, but if you look at a stream of research that's supposed to move forwards from the previous one, you'll see that the task similarities and the methodologies used are all over the place.
Yeah.
So it's almost like someone can, to an extent, make a choice as to what sorts of thing you'd like to get, and then do a study and go, gosh, look, this is better, that's better. So it's likely to me that the ecological dynamics approach will be better, will show better results for simpler tasks, for tasks that are well learned, and with athletes who are quite experienced. I can see that might work. I think you look at younger athletes, you look at more complex tasks, you look at tasks that inevitably involve an amount of decision making. Like tactics, and the traditional methods are likely to offer the best explanation. So there is limited, and I understand the limited empirical evidence, Eric, because it's bloody difficult.
Yeah.
It's not only bloody difficult to do, but it's bloody difficult to get published. And seeing as most academics want to get published,
Yeah. Yeah.
QED.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. You talked about also about some tasks are favoring some methods.
Yes. And frankly, that's where we're coming from. That's why this idea of it depends. But you choose a method, you choose an approach that best fits the outcomes you want to get. And that sort of it depends approach is very common. And it's done in a number of different settings to choose a method that most appropriately matches or promotes the outcomes you want.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. And then in point six,
Right.
the fifth of concern. Yeah.
So if we take that ecological dynamics is the approach with a capital THE, then does it work in every case? And we've done research in skill refinement. When you're taking someone who's learned something and perhaps learnt it wrong, or looking at someone who's learnt a skill and they now want to adjust it. Yeah. So we called that skill refinement. And skill refinement works very nicely off this 5A approach, which is pretty much based on getting the person to understand, to be able to think about, to be able to make conscious adjustments. So ecological dynamics doesn't seem to offer a parsimonious explanation for skill refinement. Yeah. So here's a circumstance. It's a very typical circumstance. It's what lots of coaches and practitioners are keen to do, but ecological dynamics does not seem to offer the most parsimonious explanation for this. If someone wants to come up with an explanation, that's great. Hopefully they won't invent too many new words, but away they'll go.
In point 5, you talk about direct perception in ecological dynamics.
Yeah.
And then you say, crucially, however, this approach does not consider cognitive mechanisms. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, again, if I understand correctly, direct perception for me says that all the information you need is available in the display.
Yeah.
So either visually, auditorily, haptically, all the information you need is there, and that's it. And there's no need for some internal processing of that information to tell you this is what to do.
Yeah.
And I go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But I mean, I'm always interested if someone, for example, you have the famous case of the MMA fighter who said, right, I've identified this weakness in this individual. I'm going to train to set up that weakness and counter it. So for 5-6 months, I've been training and training and training to draw the person in, make him do this, and then counter. And you can see him talking about that before the fight, clearly not published publicly. You can see him practicing that in his dressing room. You can see him go into the bout, and you can see him take out the world champion and win the bout. Now, there's been some sort of internal representation there. There's been some sort of thought. There's been some sort of, when I see this, then this will happen. So that sort of pre-processing, if you like, is something that happens quite a lot. And it happens quite a lot in sports that I'm involved with. It happens a lot in martial arts. It happens a lot in rugby. Similarly, you get people looking for situations, for displays, for patterns of defense that will then lead them to, take a certain action. So again, the recognition of the role that cognition and internal representation might play as an adjunct or in parallel to direct perception doesn't seem to be catered for. It makes sense to me that some circumstances will require this and some circumstances will require that. Makes sense. Yeah.
When we talk about it, I cannot but think about Kahneman, his how do you call it? System 1, System 2, or even maybe Gary Klein, his natural decision making model, because these are there are some top down and some sometimes you have to do it fast and automatic and direct, and sometimes you need more cognition, or is it too simple?
Yeah, and I think it might be in certain circumstances that simple. You've got a lovely word called satisficing.
Yeah.
And this is, if you've heard of it, this is the idea that ecologically, developmentally, over thousands of years, over millions of years, it's good for us to spot something happening and to come up with a solution quickly. In other words, we come up with a solution that satisfies the situation. Now, we do that without too much thought. And System 1 is an example of coming up with a solution that satisfies the constraint, and we come out quickly. Now, and as System 1 and System 2 and the Kahneman and Klein classic text shows us, that isn't always the best answer. That's fine. So, you can accept that certain systems work better in certain circumstances, but you need to check them. You need to, be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. I just recently told my wife when she wanted to make intuition the decision on her work, I say, please read Kahneman, because Kahneman, in the interview at the end of his life, he thought, follow your intuition, but check it with your how do you call it? Check it with the facts or something like that. It was a beautiful quote.
Yeah. Well, we've done when intuition was quite a big thing in coaching a few years ago. We did a study. Unsurprisingly, I did it with a colleague called Lowell Collins. He's very much into adventure sports. I'm into rugby, so he did it in kayaking. I did it in rugby, and we looked at situations where people made what were so-called intuitive decisions. But the important thing was that they all went back afterwards. And said, okay, why did I do that? Was that a good decision? So they would reflect on, they would review post hoc, and then feed that back into the system. So intuition as some sort of magical thing is not really there. It's as Klein says, it might be down to recognition primed. I've been here before. Last time I was here, I did this. Yeah. It might be down to, there's all sorts of different explanations.
Yeah.
But they're certainly more cognitive than they are ecological.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the fifth concern, and then we come to...
Now we're about there, really. And that was our lot. And our lot was saying, so our conclusion was very clearly saying, we're not saying this is rubbish and you should ignore it. Yeah, absolutely. So I quote, to be clear, we support elements of ecological dynamics, but suggested it is insufficient as a sole means to guide applied practice. That's all we were saying. And that's all this paper is saying. That you've got to look a little bit more broadly. And perhaps we should stop being so hidebound to theoretical approaches, but recognize that a theoretical, there's nothing so practical as a good theory, as someone said, but it only explains so much. Now, if someone wants to do a grand unification theory, go back. You're familiar probably with physics.
Yeah.
And in physics, there's Newtonian physics, and then there's, there's the physics of the very big and the physics of the very small and the very short. Yeah. And there are these two methods, and people have been trying for years and years and years to reconcile the two. And, they're clearly making strides, but I don't think they're there yet. Now my point would be, it makes sense to me that, we might have more than one system operating.
Yeah.
It just makes sense to me. And it makes sense to me because it makes mechanistic sense and it makes parsimonious sense. It makes applied sense. So fair enough. Let's get on with it. Let's look at where each of these two approaches, and of course the new kid on the block, active inference or predictive processing, fit in to say, this is the best explanation in this circumstance. That means you should do this. That is the best explanation in that circumstance. That means you should do that. I'm just calling for a little bit more criticality.
Yeah.
And criticality, not just on their ideas, but on our ideas as well.
Yeah.
Because God knows, I'm not right all the time.
Can you talk a few sentences ago, you talked about a new kid on the block. What's that kid?
Okay, so it's been around for quite a while. Active inference or predictive processing. It comes in several guises, and I won't go into. Excuse me. That's my Christmas cough and cold. I won't go into too much detail because it's a big topic all on its own. But it's a third approach that says actually this might be a good idea, and the idea that the brain is a prediction engine. And what it wants to do is to save us energy by predicting what it thinks is going to happen, and then perhaps favoring that or weighting our detection systems to be able to see that. And that's a nice idea because for me, anyway, and I'm no expert on this at all, but it seems to me that if I can predict accurately and know what's going to come, then I can have my reactions ready.
Yeah.
So so Eric and I are sparring, and I think Eric's going to throw a right hand. Okay, I'm now going to be ready to block, counter, whatever, as that right hand comes through. And that's fine. And that would lead to a very rapid perception action response.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm looking for Eric to throw a right hand, and then all of a sudden he throws a left foot, I'm now somewhat surprised because it's not what I predicted. And now I need to sort of literally take a moment to think about it. Well, a small moment, but take a moment to go, no, flipping heck, what's happening here? Now, in that case, it would kick me into a more cognitive pathway. Now, that to me makes sense. That to me fits with what I see with performance. It makes sense to me with what I see in the neuroscience. It makes sense.
Yeah.
So it may well be that new kid on the block will work. We have a book coming out with human kinetics next month.
Wow.
Which is a sort of a theory to practice treatment of of skill acquisition, motor control, etc., and all the related bits. We wanted to call it depends coaching, but for a whole variety of reasons, it didn't get there. But if I can just share with you the cover, get a bit of free advertising.
Of course.
Where are we? Yeah, we're quite right too. But then there we are. There we are. Da, 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 da. Right, so if I do that and then do that. Got it?
Ooh, wow.
That will be out. That will be out in early January.
Wow.
Available from Human Kinetics, and it provides a what we've tried to do, Eric, is to provide a balanced coverage of everything. So we've talked about the cognitive, we've talked about the ecological dynamics, we've talked about active inference, we've talked about the implications of those for athlete management, for practice, for what happens when they get more elite, for how you set up systems. So hopefully it will be of interest to students and perhaps, coaches as well.
Yeah.
But there you go. That's
Great. But because
too late for Christmas. Story of my life. Bad timing.
But you also publish a lot about coaching. I also saw that you published recently a paper about, what was it? I have it here. This is called Thinking Fast and Slow, an example of professional judgment and decision-making processes in athletics.
Yeah. That's us looking at what coaches actually do. And coaches are humans.
Yeah.
And we like to satisfy us. We like to come up with quick answers.
Yeah.
Because people think we're good when we come up with quick answers. And this was an example of pushing people to come up, well, say, giving coaches a situation and saying, come on, what do you think of that? And then presenting them with data that said, actually, you were wrong. What are you going to do now? And they had to go back to thinking slow and go, oh, gosh. Interestingly, 3 of them said, no, I was right all along.
Yeah.
So they ignored it. But I'm not going to comment on that. But it's a human tendency. It's a human tendency to want to be right.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Just the paper, yeah. Because we talked about ecological dynamics and motor learning and so on. But the other step, of course, is the coach. Because even if we know scientifically how it all works and so on, then how about coaching and how to decide when to use what method with what player and so on?
Which is why we emphasize this professional judgment and decision making. The capacity of the coach to make good, well-informed decisions as to what's best to be done at certain times. Yeah, no, very much so.
Yeah.
I have to say, my ideal coach development pathway would develop people through a series of challenges that they had to solve, and giving them an increasing amount of it dependsness and an increasing amount of variety, because that's what we do. Any good coach, I think, makes decisions, based on the best combination, the best blend, if you will, of what will work for him or her in any particular circumstance.
Yeah. If you are are you teaching karate?
Yeah, well, not anymore, I'm afraid. And
Okay.
but yeah, metal knees and old age, mate. But
But when you were teaching karate or doing some rugby coaching, what kind of what did you use in practice?
I used a wide variety of tools. So, for example, I would there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that I would use constraints, as defined. The big difference for me is that, having used the constraint, I would then question to tease out the why. So my example of squatting against a wall, teaching a clean to with 2 skittles to make sure that the first movement of the bar was backwards as opposed to forwards. Getting people to play on a long, thin pitch or a short, wide pitch to encourage certain patterns of play. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the only difference that I can see between a constraint set approach and what I would do is that having done that, I then question and say, okay, so what did that mean? What did that mean we should do? And then I'd actively transfer and say, okay, so would you take that? Where would that go? And I can remember doing that sort of stuff, Eric, with my with my under 11s rugby team in Milton Keynes. Yeah. If hopefully they're still playing the game, or my the sides I coached in states to the Final Four collegiate champions. Those were the approaches we used, because that's sensible. You vary your approach depending on the level, the skills, the motivation, of the players you're working with.
Yeah. Are you still coaching?
I would coach a bit, in that I would go out and, for example, I would help out with people in an outdoor setting, and I'd teach a bit of that. But mostly these days I'm either doing or I'm studying. Yeah. I'm certainly meta coaching, in that I'm working with coaches. There's another paper that we put out with two of my colleagues, Jamie Taylor and Mike Ashford, and a couple of professional premiership coaches, about the use of shared mental models. And that's I describe that as meta coaching, as that's sort of something as saying, hey, is this useful for you? And both guys went, this is great, and they both used it with their top rugby sides. So those sorts of things happen. But no. Unfortunately, perhaps those days are past, mate.
Can I just ask you some last random questions?
Yes, please.
Yeah, and the first question is, today on the European continent we have a war going on in Ukraine, and our Dutch former minister president Mark Rutte is now the Secretary General of the NATO, and we hear a lot of talk about resilience and so on and so on. And but you have written also a lot about resilience, because one of the first papers I read of you a long time ago was The Rocky Road to the Top. That was also about resilience, I think. But what do you think about not about the war and so on, but about the resilience thing, the resilience part?
I think three things about resilience. I think resilience is a good example of construct creep. It's a good example of a construct that's really quite important, but it's not as important and as broad as some people make it. Yeah. So I think it's, again, I go back to the mechanism and the parsimony. How does resilience work? What makes you resilient? Now, we've done work. Did it quite a few years ago on the psychological characteristics of developing excellence, PCDEs, and we use those as a mechanism by which resilience or grit or growth mindset or can be accomplished. So resilience is that's where I'm coming from. It's how does it work? I think the second thing is to recognize that there will be times when you want resilience, and there will be times when you don't want resilience. Yeah, there'll be circumstances where you want someone to be compassionate, to be able to step back and go, no, that's unacceptable. I'm not going to do that. But the main thing for me is that it's because it's so popular, it's ill-defined. Because so many people talk about it, Eric's explanation as to what it is and how it works is different to Dave's, is different to Fred's, is different, whatever. Yeah. And as a consequence, it's quite hard to talk about it, because if someone can define resilience like it's the whole shooting match, like they used to with mental toughness. Mental toughness was everything in sports psychology. It was everything that you wanted. So it would be very, very hard to say, well, do you believe in mental toughness? Well, define like that. Of course I do. Yeah. But I don't think that's very useful. And I especially, if I take a further step back, I especially don't think it's very useful when you work as a psychologist or a coach with an athlete client. one of the first things I think you do is some form of case conceptualization. You measure things and speak with the client athlete, with people around them. You measure stuff, etc., etc., and then you come up with a sort of a working hypothesis that says this is what I think the issues are, and here's my working plan as to how we're going to address it. And then what you do is you refine that as you go through. And of course you refine, because as they get better in one thing, you can twist the, or you can shift the attention to another thing. But that's the main thing, that you've done an assessment, you know where you are, and you move forwards. So does someone need to be resilient? Well, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, in the right circumstance, at the right time. Yes, they do. But how do you make them there? Well, that's the $64,000 question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me, you worked with Christian Ittebol on his PhD, I think.
Worth who, sorry?
Christian Ittebol.
Yes, Christian Ittebol. Yes,
From,
well known. Right, he was Norwegian military, and now he's working for the Olympiatoppen.
From what?
Yeah, the Olympiatoppen, the Olympic Center in Oslo. Yeah. So you know he's the one with the big beard and the tats.
Yeah. I had a beautiful conversation with him about his PhD, and but it reminds me. Also, he talked about the thing you case conceptualization and asking the right questions, and yeah.
No, he's a good lad, but he's also pretty big. So even if you think he's a twit, don't tell him.
I can imagine. Yeah. So, do you have some final thoughts about what we talked about?
I think the main thing I would want to emphasize, Eric, is that it's, we wrote the paper not as an act of provocation. We wrote the paper because we're going, look, have a look, have a think about this. Yeah, we need to be a little bit more discerning and a little bit more critical. Yeah, and if a method and a theoretical approach is being hawked as the way, the only way, that can't be right.
Yeah.
Everything works something, but nothing works everywhere. Yeah. But if someone's saying this is a good theory, it works in these circumstances, and then of course we're going, yeah, you're right. Yeah. But therefore, what we want to try and know is where it doesn't work. Yeah. And where it works better and where it works less well. And then that's fine. So what we're asking for is if you like, a shades of grayness. Yeah. Not 50 of them, because that would be wrong, but some shades of gray in this, because things about humans are really black and white, and things about human mechanisms and systems are really black and white.
What keeps you fired up in your long time in the game?
Well, a long time in the game. I was I was out with one of my daughters and her husband the other day at the Churchill War Rooms. You mentioned Churchill earlier.
Yeah.
And when he was asked why he was hanging around so long in politics, he said, "Well, when I went to the pub, I always wanted to wait till closing time." So maybe so maybe that's it. But no, I've got goals. There's things I want to achieve. I want 500 papers. I want 100 book chapters. I want I want to achieve. But the main thing is I'm hoping that the research we do is useful. It's not me sort of counting, ticking off notches on the bedpost papers wise. It's are we putting out stuff that stimulates thought and gets people talking? And personally, that's what I'd like to do. Rather than people engaging in pejorative abuse on social media, that they go, actually, there might be something in that, or there's nothing in that. Here's the evidence. Where we go.
Yeah.
So thank you again for the opportunity.
Yes,
I'm honored. I'm honored to have been on twice. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Yes. Do you come to the Netherlands?
I'm lucky. Maybe I'll get it right next time.
Do you think you ever come to the Netherlands again?
Do I think
you come to the Netherlands?
I would happily come to that. I've been a very good guy I used to work with, Charles van Grommene.
Yeah.
And he had me across at one stage to do some talks with Dutch teams. I worked in short track speed skating, so I came across the Netherlands every time on that. So yeah, happy to, mate. Happy to.
Great. Well, thank you, Dave, and have a great day. And I hope that if people have any thoughts about the topic we talked about, that that they reach out to us and have a nice conversation about it.
I hope so too, Eric. And,
Yeah.
and may I wish you and your viewers a very happy new year.
Thank you so much. You also, Dave. I will round up this and say goodbye to you offline. Thank you for listening and have a nice new year. Bye bye.